Batu, Marana, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm okay. I think I'm here. I don't think I've murdered anyone, so that's pretty good right now. How about you?
Yeah, live. I'm literally living the dream, I think is what I'll say. I'm living the dream. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and we're going to be talking about another film today. We're leaving behind Hollywood, and we're going to be sort of going it's the second time for this season. We're doing some European cinema. We're going to be talking about 1997's Open Your Eyes, which I'll give the plot to in a little bit. But before I do, Julian, what were your first thoughts then about this film?
Well, I selected this. I've seen this before. I was quite fond of this film when it came out. I'm a huge fan of Amenábar. I think he's a fantastic director. I loved his Thesis, which is sort of a horror movie, like snuff films going on at a university. So I've been like following this dude, and I love this movie, and I liked Vanilla Sky, the American remake of it. It's been years since I've seen this, and seeing it again, I'm less impressed with it than I was earlier. I think that earlier I would think that I would have said it was like an 8. It really affected me. I really loved its themes, and now I would say it's more like a 7. What about you?
Yeah, first time seeing this for me. I have seen Vanilla Sky, and we will be talking about that in the next episode. But it definitely has a 90s. It feels very 90s. In not in a bad way. That's not sort of a comedy. It just has that sort of feel to me. We'll get into what I feel about this film. It's fine. It's not a bad film. Like, I enjoyed it. I went on the ride. There's an element of mystery in it. And, this idea, is it a dream? Is it not? What's he in prison for? And all these other bits and pieces. I like all that. Even slightly knowing where it's going. The problem for me, and as this is often the case, is the fact that I don't like the people in it, as the characters. Like the actors are all fine. It's just this thing of the biggest problem I have with this when we get to it is the fact that basically it's a rich guy who is in a real nutshell, rich guy, disfigured, slightly sort of abandoned, gets frustrated, finds a way of fixing it. That's it.
Yeah.
Like there's no sort of like lesson to be learned. There's no obstacle to really cross. Like there's no consequence at the end of this. Sort of like he's.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think like this is sort of from that era of like the movie The Game, where like it wasn't. I mean, that's a fantastic movie. Now I watch it, I'm like, it's still a fantastic movie, but you're a rich fuck.
Yes.
And this guy he's rich, he's a playboy, he's handsome, and I used to watch this, and we'll get into my mental illness and ways in which I identify with this character, but some of which are still there. My version of that, I mean, I think we've both become probably more class conscious, especially as income disparity has,
massively,
and as my life has retreated. And, when I saw this, I was, early university. My life was ahead of me. I thought I, would be a millionaire within 5 years. And somehow that didn't happen. Even more than that, this character sort of having two women who are madly in love with him, who are both phenomenally attractive. At that time, I was just like, yeah, that's my life. Because I'm, a smart guy at a, expensive private liberal arts school, and everybody's having sex with everyone else, and I'm getting drunk, and I'm doing drugs, and I'm living the college lifestyle, and learning great things, and writing novels, and, it's all going to happen for me. And now I look back on it, and I'm like, yeah, you privileged jerk.
Yeah. I think that privilege is a big part of this film, and it's one of the things I kind of that stands out. Like the character of Cesar, is very much like he's the playboy. He is. I've put it in this plot summary, which we'll get to in a second. But like he is just a playboy. And then when you meet his other characters, like he clearly looks down on everyone, and so. Throughout it, Sophia, like the Penelope Cruz character, like I have no idea what she sees in him. Granted, like the second part, like the love interest part, is, and it's sort of when it's all resolved, like all I can think about is like, yeah, this guy's just a narcissist. Like he has built this world in which he is the center of it, and it's clear that that's the point. Because. There is no scene without him in. Like, he is in all of this film. And so for me, I was watching this going, oh, this is a narcissist story. Like, nobody else needs to be a character. There's no depth to anybody else. Like, nothing about... And they even acknowledge that. Like, you get to learn nothing about Nuria. Very little about Sophia. Even his best friend... Pelayo,
yes.
Like you learn nothing about any of them. He clearly doesn't know much about them either, and doesn't care. Like this is a narcissist story told from a narcissist point of view.
Yeah, well, the other thing you mentioned is you mentioned the friend, and he treats his friend terribly. He does not seem to really care about anyone. I am much more open to unlikable narrators than most people. But I think one of the things that has aged poorly is not only that, but also like, what do we know about Nuria? She is really attractive. Like she could be a model, and she's also completely in love with him and completely crazy.
Yeah.
Well, when I was 20, that was like my experience of women. It's like, I've got, young college girls all around me. This was, like my view of reality. And I thought, this is embarrassing, but I thought, yeah, a lot of guys are crazy too, but I knew a lot of crazy women. Now I understand crazy attracts crazy, and I was the common denominator there. I was the problem. I didn't really know that at the time, and so Nuria's kind of presented through that lens that I might have had back then, where it's just like, yeah, what else do you need to know? She's a hot, crazy girl. Not that those people don't exist, but it does seem to have that lens of sort of not just privilege, but also sort of an immaturity in its outlook.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, because again, even some of the primary characters in this, out of sight, out of mind, seems relevant, and then they pop up again, and you're like, oh yeah, shit, you're in this. I completely forgot you were in this. Pelayo being a really good example of that, like playing a really key part in the first 15 minutes, and then it's almost like, oh yeah, what do we do with him? And then he's just about, and it's yeah. But before we get into it, let's do the plot. Let's give the plot. So. Stick with me. I've tried to not go the full Gattaca because I feel, obviously in the last episode, I basically sort of read the script. So here we go. Cesar, played by... I apologise firstly up front. I am going to try and pronounce these correctly. I probably won't. So, Julian, if you wish to correct me at any point, I won't be offended. Cesar, played by Eduardo Noriega, is a young playboy living off the money made from his parents' restaurant chain, living from party to party and woman to woman. One such woman is Nuria, Najwara Nimiri, who has become obsessed with Cesar. On his birthday, Cesar throws a party and meets his best friend's Paleo, Vele Martinez, new friend / girlfriend, never really confirmed, Sophia, played by Penelope Cruz, who Cesar takes a liking to. At the same time, Nuria crashes the party, pushing herself onto Cesar, only to be rejected. In an attempt to avoid her further, Cesar uses Sophia, and they start a long conversation which results in the two spending the night talking until the sun rises. Leaving Sophia's apartment, Cesar finds Nuria parked outside, and again she proposes they sleep together. Cesar, having not slept with Sophia, actually gets in the car, knowing he's going to score. However, Nuria has other plans. As they head out of the city, the car gets faster and faster, and finally drives off the road with Nuria intending to kill herself and Cesar. Cesar survives and spends 3 weeks in a coma and suffers extensive facial injuries. Even after several reconstructive surgeries, Cesar's face is disfigured. Frustrated that nothing more can be done, he starts to wear a mask and drink heavier and heavier. Not even able to manage support from his friends. One evening at a party, he goes too far and finds himself alone and passes out drunk in the street. The following day, he is woken by Sophia and she comforts him. They reconcile and start spending more time together. Also, a procedure is found that will completely fix his disfigurement. Life returns to normal for him, but we are also seeing a Cesar in a different time, in his mask, being questioned about a murder he has committed that he cannot remember the full details of. As we flip between the two times, we reach a conversion point, when Cesar wakes in the night to find that Sophia has been replaced by Nuria. Cesar calls the police, but they and Paleo state the woman he sees as Nuria is Sophia. Cesar starts to think he's going crazy and goes to confront the Nuria Sophia, but after an argument, he sees the original version of Sophia. In relief and passion, the two fall into bed, but as they are having sex, again, Cesar again sees Nuria, and in his confusion, he pulls a pillow over her face and kills her. As he dashes from the building, he sees his reflection and his disfigurement has returned, leaving him wondering, is this real or a crazy nightmare? There's a lot more to it than that, but that was a very sort of quick summary. So, let's start with this film. So first, there's two things I want to quickly start with. I do love how this film is shot, and this film, I think, tells you two things up front. So this film, and it's redone in Vanilla Sky, starts with Cesar sort of waking up, leaves his apartment, gets into his car, Volkswagen Beetle, and drives out into Madrid, and the streets are empty. And he has that sort of moment, and it's sort of like, it's not majorly referenced, it's not really played on or anything like that, but it's clearly that there's something wrong here. Like, you know, it's this idea of how big a part dreams are going to play in this film, and that, you know, he may not have full control over those dreams, or he may have full control over those dreams. The other thing I noticed that was interesting is there's a part when he is then driving later on, very, very shortly after this, to go meet his friend Paleo for them to play squash, and he sees a mime in the that's Penelope Cruz, that's Sophia. And I thought, because she obviously turns up later on, you see her, she's an actress, she's training to be an actress. Not Penelope Cruz, she was already an actress, but the character Sophia, she's dressed as, she becomes a mime in the same park, and you see her from distance, and it's obviously because she wears the cake makeup and all that sort of stuff looks slightly different. But I found that interesting that actually they snuck her in straight away. Or that was at least my interpretation of it. But yeah, those two things right at the beginning I thought were quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool point. I hadn't thought of that, but, you know, I'll have to watch it again with that in mind. I love the beginning. I love I mean, in terms of things that we like, I love the Abre los ojos beginning and ending, right?
Yeah.
I love this. I mean, this is pre the Matrix, this idea of reality isn't real. I am very sympathetic to simulation theory. Here, that's not the case. It's a sort of more limited computer VR environment, but it still has some of the same thing. The sort of like haunting way that life extension is in the background throughout, and you sort of know something's wrong. But I also identify with this sort of descent into madness. And I find the car crash and the facial disfigurement really quite haunting. I think that stuff works really well.
Oh no, I agree. I think the way this film is shot and some of the sort of choices are absolutely fantastic. The car crash, again, it's one of those. It's quite an interesting car crash because we are very, very used to Hollywood car crashes, and obviously he has to survive for the film to continue. So they go off the side of a cliff, or not a cliff. They go down a big hill and they hit a wall and they go through the barriers and all this other stuff. And there's a part of my brain that's been programmed by sort of like, Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay. That I'm like, hang on, that car should have somersaulted 4 or 5 times by now and exploded into a ball of flame. And and it doesn't. And so there's that moment I'm like, that's a disappointing car crash. And straight after I'm like, oh, no. I just understand that the ridiculousness of action cinematography. What I would say is, though, that his disfigurements in this are really well done. I think the makeup is great. It never feels like makeup. It feels like, like they've done work on him and stuff. And I love the fact that it's not shied away from. And you as a viewer are sort of forced to confront it, and it's not sort of treated. And weirdly, it's not treated in that. And it's sort of it's sort of called out, but then it's not treated in that Beauty and the Beast kind of way. It's not sort of like, yes, we see that you're ugly on the outside, but you're beautiful on the inside. There's none of that. It's like it's just a raw emotion. Like this one thing that this guy was recognized as being attractive, and that was one of the key things he was noted for. It's just been taken away from him. Like he hung part of his personality on that, and I understand the trauma that would be associated with that.
Yeah, when I was in my early 20s, I was in a bicycle accident, and about half of my face was ripped off, and my one side of my brain was bleeding out of my ear, and I had gravel just ground. Both my eyebrows were gone. My skull was fractured, and I still remember I was just in graduate school, and there was another graduate student who I had just met, who was a woman, and she came to the hospital, and I remember her in the room with me, and this is an attractive woman. I've met her recently, and she looked down at me and said, "Ask for a plastic surgeon." And she sort of recoiled and pressed herself against the far wall of the room. And I knew I was going to be, the doctor said, yeah, this stuff is not coming back, right? I mean, we'll see. And it healed. I mean, I was young and incredibly lucky. But, the irony is he's not beautiful on the inside.
Yeah.
And he kind of needs this accident.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I had to live in those moments with the reality of like, yeah, you are going to be facially disfigured for the rest of your life. And, thinking about being in a bar, like that stuff came back to me so strongly. The irony is I think that should make you a better person.
Yes.
Like in my case, I knew on the hospital bed, I was like, okay, if this is what I'm dealing with, all right, maybe I'll have, trouble finding a partner, but I will have more time to write and do other things. And this, is not the end of the world, right? Life will go on. He seems completely broken by it. And I think it goes to your point that he really is a narcissist.
Yeah, and again, I think we were talking about just off air. Oh no, we were talking about the idea of the narcissism. And like I said, this is a narcissist film told from a narcissist point of view. Like, his fear, like later in the film, and we'll get to some of the earlier bits, but later on, after the procedure has happened, his biggest fear is like they go into the bathroom. It's almost like it's like a horror. It's almost done like a horror jump scare. Like he turns on the light, and the disfigurement has returned, and then he jolts, and it's a dream within a dream. It's very Inception. But like you say, that's his fear. Like once that procedure has happened and he has returned to himself, like that's his fear. Like it's all hung on his looks. You say about one of the things that this film isn't cliched. It doesn't fall into those sort of tropes. I think would be the Hollywood tropes of your friends are there for you.
Mm.
His friend Paleo sort of is. He tries to be a little bit, but there's still that thing there of like, I'm frustrated with you, and like I don't quite know how to relate to you anymore in this way. And it's interesting that when he has the procedure and stuff, and they're able to joke again then about the fact that he basically stole Sophia off him.
Mm-hmm.
And but once he has the disfigurement, like you can tell, like Paleo like does not know how to relate to him, and they really have their struggles. But even now, like Sophia has met him once, and that's the thing you have to acknowledge in this film. Like she's held up as this sort of like love icon in this film a little bit, but she meets him like once or twice, and then she's sort of like forced to confront him with the disfigurement. And she, like I say, they play it like she's really uncomfortable.
Yes, and I quite like that.
I agree. It's not like her going sort of like, but I know you've got a good heart and all this other shit or whatever. There's none of that. She's like, no, I met you a couple of times and it was nice, but like,
yeah, I met you once and we talked all night, but
why am I having? Yeah, I shouldn't have to deal with. This is not something I intended to deal with. I'm not super rich. I've literally got to cover off things. I'm at school. I'm doing this thing like, and I kind of like that they do that. That like she shows a selfish side, but it's human. It feels natural. It feels normal for her to be like, why am I in this situation?
Yeah. No, I quite like what you're saying, and it reminds me of there's that episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David is desperate to break up with a chick before she gets a cancer diagnosis. And here it's like, she had this great night with him, but he then got into a car crash, that morning, like within hours. Moreover, she knows that he stole her, I mean, that's not fair to say. She's not a piece of property to be passed around, but that, he is not a nice guy. He moved in on her.
He manipulated the situation so that he could basically cock block Paleo. That's what it boils down to. And he even says it like, because she doesn't sleep with him, and she says like she won't on that first night. Because then she's like, well, what about your best friend? And he's like, yeah, well, he is my best friend. That's why I'm not going to tell him. Like, I'm still going to do it. Yeah. But I'm not going to tell him.
Yeah. But also, I mean, like from her perspective, okay, so yeah, there were sparks, right? But he's built her up into the one that got away, right? That I had this terrible accident with. In reality, they had some sparks. But then within hours, he got into a car with another woman, who, is only a part of his life because he is such a reckless playboy who is exactly the type you don't want to, commit to for the rest of your life. And you don't owe this person anything. And I think she's very uncomfortable because he, of course, today in a sort of like post-Me Too world, it seems like he is really imposing on her. He feels as if she owes him something because of that night, and because of what he's been through, that he's been disfigured. And in reality, I think she feels put upon that he keeps trying to kind of guilt her into having a relationship or reciprocating something. And, all she needs to say is, yeah, we had one nice night of talking together, and then you screwed it up by, getting in the car with this crazy woman who you were involved with, and I did not sign on for all of this shit.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair, and that's the thing, and that's where I get sort of like a little bit. And when you're watching this straight, like I say, one of the things I will say is because he gets in the times in the car in the rear, and there's a great moment where because she says to him like, Yeah, well, I sort of like, what do they call it? She sort of says, I looked out last night, but basically saying I'm really horny and I didn't get in last night, and I'm thinking that you're in the same position, so why don't we go off and let's jump in the car together? And there's a moment where he looks up at the apartment and he clearly makes that decision. He's like, yeah, all right, yeah, which is,
Mhm.
you know, a young man's decision to make. It makes sense. I get that. But it's clearly not the right one to make, and we've all made mistakes, you know. But like, I kind of like that. But like you said, from her point of view, like you say, from Sophia's point of view, she's like, the accident you were involved in, you were driving away from my apartment with the woman you were trying to get away from the night
Right.
before. Like,
Yeah, and who you used to try to romance
Yeah.
me with, right? To springboard off of. But I do think the movie knows that.
oh yeah, no, I agree. Yes,
I
definitely.
mean, it knows that he's imposing on Sophia. I mean, he seems so pathetic in the bar, you know, trying to reenact this chemistry as if trying to recapture this moment, and that moment's gone. And I mean, he seems pathetic, and he gets drunk, but also I think it gets at that uncomfortability. It doesn't play into the Beauty and the Beast stuff, but it gets at that uncomfortability that we have around disfigurement and around, you know, I mean, he is hard to look at. I think that scene with him talking to the bartender, where he's a dick to the bartender,
Yeah.
but he's also got a point, right?
Yeah, he
Like the
does, yeah.
bartender listens and looks him in the eye and then says, all right, the next round's on me. And the bartender's not a bad guy, but I mean, you can certainly see how, I mean, it upsets me to think about, and yet I'm part of that same society in which it's hard to look at this person, and he doesn't seem like the same dashing, you know,
Yeah.
romantic guy that he was a minute ago.
And it's this thing, you know, and I think we will address this more when we watch the Hollywood version of this, about this the extent of disfigurement. Like, yeah, they don't mess around. Like, you know, they have done a fantastic job of making him. It's not just a sort of like, you know, I'm disfigured and he's like got a scratch over his eye or his nose is broken. It's like, no, like they show, and there's a great sort of like, it's partial stuff, but they show that he's obviously very rich and he's paying this panel of doctors. And they show sort of like flashes, a little bit like, you know, with what's it? The first one we watched, Eyes Without a Face.
Mm-hmm.
That thing of the basically the rawness of the medical side of it. Like, you see on behind them, there's these sort of X-rays and photos of what he was like, and they're like, no, look, and the guy says, compared to what you were,
Mm-hmm.
what we've done is an absolute craftsman's job based on what we know today. And they're sort of like saying that you know, but we're not saying you're pretty, you know, you're not going to go win any sort of like, you know, Mr. Madrid contest, but this is the best you're going to get. And even that's like, you know, you have come this far. They said, I think he said like 3 surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, that's obviously the point where they're like, no, you're at a full stop with this.
Yeah, and even there he seems like a dick, right? He's telling them, I'm going to throw money at you, do better. It's hard to identify
something.
with. I mean,
I love that it says invent something, experiment on it. Like, he's that desperate, like he's willing to be the human trial for something, which is what the fantasy becomes. But one of the things I wanted to sort of bring up, that this was really interesting for me, especially this being a European film, and if it'd been French, I think it'd probably been a bit more interesting. They give him a mask, and they don't refer to it as a mask. They refer to it as a facial prosthesis. Bloody hell. It's a mask. Prosthetic. It's a facial prosthetic. Now, it is clearly a mask. It's modelled on his face. Again, it's sort of set in a certain way. It's got flesh tones. It's not Eyes Without a Face, sort of like, you know, emotionless. It's not that. It's not Michael Myers. It's but it has a lack of movability, but it's supposed to. The idea is, as I say, it's sort of meant to blend in a little enough that from a distance people wouldn't really notice. Now, this idea of not calling it a mask and calling it a facial prosthetic is really interesting, because I know there's a thing. So, following World War One, French and British, but also and Spanish vets came back from the trenches and whether it be from mortar fire or more likely mustard gas attacks and other chemical attacks. These men had severe facial injuries, like they'd lost part of their jaw or their nose and all this other stuff. And there was a woman, and I'm really annoyed I didn't get a chance to sort of Google it to find out what her name was, but there was a woman who invented facial prosthetics, and she would model them, and she sort of like crafted them, and I think they were made out of, I completely forget, but they were brilliant. If you and Google this, honestly, Google it. Post World War I facial prosthetics, they're very, very good. Like, it shows you the before and after, and it's so impressive. And it was a mercy. Like, they weren't able to pay for them; they were given these things. But it made me think of that. And again, it's this struggle I have with this film that we've said. Like, you say about having an unlikable narrator or an unlikable protagonist. When I know of this history of these men that were given these facial prosthetics that sort of lost their face in a war, defending their country or their home and stuff, against a rich guy who, lost it in a car accident with a woman that was like, clearly he was, treating illly, to be fair. It rankles me again, because I'm like, the frustration and the anger and stuff he shows is sort of this thing of like, he's just got no, I don't know. It just feels sort of like, here's these guys that went through hell and sort of like, almost forced to live with it, and this guy who's got the money to try and do what he can, and he's annoyed with this as the result, and it's sort of like, it makes me dislike him even more at that point.
Yeah. And I'm okay with an unlikable narrator, and I do identify with his pain. I think that the doctor thing gets at me a little more, just because I'm always so annoyed when people are, mean to servers in restaurants or to people in drive-thrus, and doctors are obviously at a different level. You assume they're doing well and, can stand being yelled at a little. But they've done, great work restoring his face. I mean, there's no point at which, like they say, you survive, right? You were lucky to survive. There's this sort of, he seems incapable of, I think the most unlikable trait, I think what you're getting at is that it's not just that he's rich. It's not just that he's a narcissist. It's that he seems incapable of taking a step back and saying, I got dealt a shit hand here. But in the big scheme of things, I'm still doing okay. I need to take a step back and just get outside of myself and say, I don't need to be, I'm lucky to be alive. Lots of people are in worse situations than I am. My life isn't over. I'm still a rich white dude, And so maybe I don't have the girlfriend that I want, that I'm thinking of and obsessing over. It's not like I'll never find somebody else. It's I mean, I'm a rich white dude in my 20s. Yes, I have a disfigurement, but life is far from over. Find something to fucking do with yourself, right?
Yeah,
but he has no perspective.
Perspective, I think that's a really good, that's the word I'm looking for. It's that idea of perspective. Like, it just doesn't exist. It's just this tunnel vision of what he wants, which sort of feeds into that sort of idea of the narcissism, that he's at the center of his story. But then, like I say, we get to this. I'm trying to think of a point now. We then sort of he has this mask, and that obviously leads to this. The bar scene and everything else, and it gives you clues at this point, because this sort of scene of him being drunk, and he has this sort of confrontation with Pelayo, and then sort of Penelope Cruz, sort of, and there's a moment when he says to her, she kisses Pelayo both cheeks, sort of very European, then she goes to kiss him, and sort of like he says, I'll poison you with my drunken breath. But he clearly still is. He in himself is clearly very uncomfortable with his disfigurement, which I kind of like. Again, he's not, doesn't want it to be recognised, and it's obviously a small token sort of gesture on her part. but in watching it through, I was like, this is weird. It feels very final. If it struck me, I was like watching. This feels like oddly final. And then obviously he passes out, and she wakes him up the next day, and then they carry on this thing. But that ending, that goodbye, felt, and it's again like it's clues. Like this film really does lay out everything you need to know for when you get to the twist to go, or the reveal, I should say, to go. Oh, fine, that makes total sense. Everything is there up to for you to be able to go. This is where it all changes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think that's what's really great about this movie. I mean, there are people who are still confused by like The Matrix or whatever, or, you know. I mean, it's one thing to be confused by Inception. It's another thing to be confused by The Matrix. But this film does, as you say, it does an excellent job of telegraphing those things. You also see, and you also see the life extension guy. You know, I mean, there's a lot of hints there, and you're right. It feels very final. And when Sophia finds him in the street, she very quickly says, "I love you." And I think your first reaction is, how does she find him? Why has she reversed herself? And then you sort of start rationalizing and say, oh, well, she was uncomfortable the night before, but,
she's had time to think about it. And
right, and feel bad for him and remember what they had together and, come to grips with having seen his face and whatever. And so you start rationalizing it, as I think we do, all the time in films and all the time in narrative. I mean, it's essential to the Eisensteinian juxtaposition, right? You take two, you see him in the car looking at her in the park as a mime. There's no indication that those are the same shot, right? I mean, they could have been shot on completely different locations, but we in our brain connect the two. We are always in film and always in narrative making things make sense that don't really make sense. And so I think we sort of rationalize it and go with it. But then when you find out, spoilers, that is the moment at which a splice occurred. Right. It makes absolute perfect sense.
It does, and I love it for that, because again, like I said, this film acts. One of the things that, again, I think you and I sort of said before, like, neither of us can stand that thing where they're like mystery, and then it comes to the reveal, and it's like, oh, and here's this person that you knew nothing about acting behind the scenes, or like there's a character introduced in the last 10 minutes, and it's like, hang on, no. Much like with the golden age of the golden age of mystery fiction, like. Everything should be in the film. Everything should be in the story for you to be able to figure everything out as the viewer or the reader. And this film does it repeatedly. Like you say telegraphs. I think it doesn't. I think it gives you everything. I think some things are probably slightly telegraphed, but others aren't. But
yeah, I'm not using it as a pejorative. I mean, set up exactly as you're describing.
And so, we should highlight. I think the thing is, this is the point where we need to then talk about. We need to talk about the reveal to then talk about the second half of this film, really. So there's a company called Life Extension, and it's a cryogenics company, which has been mentioned at the start of the film. There's actually the guy watched a documentary on it, and what we find out at the end of the film is that this company, it can freeze you. They keep using Walt Disney as the reference, which I think is hilarious.
It's urban legend.
Yeah.
Record.
But they said they can freeze you, and then what the idea is that sort of like, you pay this amount of money, and then, basically the interest on that money pays for your maintenance and this other stuff. And then at a point in the future, you will be revived. And if you've had an illness, then they can cure it and all this other stuff. Or at the point of death, they can do this, whatever. However, you have a choice. You can either be revived into the real world and they can, fix it, or you can then be spliced at some point into a virtual reality existence, and you'll just basically live on that. And then I assume it goes into repeat or whatever. Because he does say, I feel like I've done this before. In several occasions, if he has a scene where he's like, oh, I feel like I've done this before, so it's clearly not the first time he's been through this. So I want to know, or at least that's how I take it. I take it this isn't the first time through for him. Like something changes for this version.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't see it that way. I mean, I don't think that's precluded from being the case. I think when he's having those moments of deja vu, that he's sort of remembering some of that stuff that was edited out of his memory as part of the splice. But you're right. I mean, that is a perfectly possible interpretation.
Yeah, so basically what we find out is that he has been spliced. He took the choice to take this virtual reality option. But what's happened is, as he has entered it, the splice being that night he passed out in the street and then Sophia waking him up is the start of this thing. He has this fantasy of reconciliation and romance and all this other stuff, but his brain sort of rebels against him. But as he's having that sort of like, you know, he does kill, as I said in the story, he kills this sort of Nuria Sophia person, and is obviously arrested for murder. And then the psychiatrist is helping him work through it, and he starts to have these visions of going to a place where there's a picture of someone walking into a sunset, and he's signing a contract and all sorts of stuff. And it's then revealed that yes, he took this cryogenics path. And so you then can go back and you can watch that second, you can watch the whole film, and then you can see all the bits sort of falling into place. And I think it's really well done in that respect, that it keeps you sort of like, it keeps you just off kilter. So you can sort of like, you know, you sort of know what's coming, but it's just off kilter enough that you're like, I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I don't know if it's the real case.
Yeah, and another way that it accomplishes that is through having those mysteries in the dream plot, right? Which sort of distract you from the fact that that doesn't matter anyway, because ultimately the solution to those mysteries there is no solution. He's making it up. You know, one of the creepiest moments is in the bar when everyone stops.
Yeah.
And the head of Life Extension is there and tells him, yeah, basically everybody, you know, they're NPCs. They don't say this, but, you know.
But this goes back to this idea, because really for me, that scene and the ending when, you know, this guy, the guy from Life Extension is telling, you know, he's giving his sort of villain monologue, if you will, but it's not, it's the explanation. That part in the bar, though, told me this is a narcissist story, because he actually says, no, they're all there for you. Like, you can do whatever you want. You can make these people do whatever you want. And that's to me was where I was like, oh, okay, this is sort of like really feeding into this idea again that he is the center of this universe and he has complete control. However, it sort of freaks him out, but that's what it's telling me.
Yeah, I mean, but this is part of the problem with, like, I mean, I agree with you that it's a narcissist story, right? And that he is very narcissistic. And this is a very solipsistic movie, right? I mean, ultimately, it's his reality. He defined it and he created his own problems, including his arrest and not being able to keep these women straight in his mind, which, you know, resulted in the murder. But if you are in a scenario like that, you are in a solipsistic reality, right? They really are there for you. And so, yes, he's a narcissist, but he's a narcissist who's been placed in what is objectively a narcissistic world, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
It's not his fault
at
that point.
Yeah, I get that. So, so the plot certainly is not his fault, but it's also, from a thematic point of view, that's the choice he made for a start. Right. So it's not his fault. It is his fault. He chose it as his option to not. You know, he didn't want to be revived. He wanted to live out this fantasy world. And so to me, that's the opposite to me. Like, that's not him going, oh, he was forced into, or he was, you know, this thing was built up for him. No, he made that choice after a conversation. Like, he was informed, and then he committed suicide to then enter into this fantasy. Which to me starts to build up this again thing of, like, as you said, him sort of like putting Sophia on a plinth, like she is this the one that got away, this love icon that he has, and sort of how sort of like when you realize what the truth of what happened, like he woke up the next morning, there was no one there, he retracted into his own world and stuff, and eventually it leads to his suicide. Is you go, okay, yeah, I understand that. Like, you know, like Pelayo and no one else seemed to be following up on him and all this other stuff. okay, it's sort of I can understand this sort of, you know, these things happen and these people regress into their own lives. But this thing of him choosing the virtual reality thing, it tells me his mind state. And it tells me, again, talking about the Me Too thing, like, he chose to turn her into a commodity. And he made it about him so that he could live out his fantasy. So again, like I said, no, to me, that's, you know, that is him choosing this narcissistic existence.
Right. And I mean, it also suggests, I mean, think about what it implies of that suicide, that suicide is ultimately a selfish decision. Now, as somebody who struggled with suicidal ideation, you know, I am more sympathetic to people who, you know, I don't think it's a good thing, but, you know, I don't hate people, especially if they're in pain, and he's in pain. Having said that, his depiction is that essentially, like, well, I'm disfigured. I can't have the girl that I want. Screw this. I'm overturning the table. I'm going to die if I can't be handsome and get the girl that I want, even when she's with another guy. And that guy is my best friend. And he was with her effectively. I mean, it was clear at least he had interest in her when I met her. I mean, the levels of self-indulgence, you know, I mean, you have to be pretty self-indulgent to do that because you have to want to get straight into that fantasy. If it were me, I would say, okay, I don't like any of this. Yeah. I have the money. I'm going to go into that fantasy world anyway. Let's play this out. I can reasonably expect I've got another 50-some years of life left. Let's, you know, I mean, let's see what I can do with that. See what, you know, what else I can find to define my life. And at the end of that, I can still go into that fantasy world anytime I want. So it's pretty narcissistic to be like, screw this. I'm not going to live out 50 years with a face that isn't pretty and without being able to get every girl that I want. I'm just going to kill myself and go straight into that, as you say, really sort of self-indulgent fantasy that he chose for himself.
And exactly. And you know, even within that fantasy, as it progresses, like he gets Sophia and it's all fine and stuff, there's still, like you say, he hasn't changed. There's still this sort of thing, sort of, at least in my head, you watch and go like, so what happens in 6 months' time? Mm-hmm. At what point does he go like, yeah, I'm bored, I'm going to go find somebody else or whatever? Like, or, you know, Sophia, like, if it's, I know it's all in his head, but it will play out because, you know, based on the reality that he knows, she's busy or doing something else, or she's trying to get through school, or she gets another job or whatever. Like, you know, he is more than likely to be like, okay, well, I'm going to go off and find somebody else. Like, he's going to continue this. And so, yeah, you know, it's such a short-sighted, like you say, perspective is a really good, word for this, because it's so short-sighted, it's so impulsive. I know we are all responsible, and it did trigger things for me as well. So, and then you said about this idea of immature, of this impulsivity that you sort of have in your 20s and stuff of doing. I didn't, you know, we've talked about air before, the stupid things that I've done. I'm not going to confess them on air because they were really stupid. But also, one of the things is there's a moment in this that I completely related with, and I can sort of understand where it comes from. So the moment when he is drunk, they've been to the club, and Sophia has gone off. Like, she's said good night, and he's walking with Palaio, and then Palaio's like, "Oh, I've got to go. Like, I've left my bike in the other direction. We're closer to yours. You go off. I'll just see you. You know, I'll see you later or whatever." And he sort of goes, you know, at first he's like, "Oh, I'll come with you." He's like, No, you go. And he's left alone with his own thoughts.
Yeah. And
it takes him a second, but then all of a sudden his imagination kicks in, and it's like his imagination is like, okay, Palaio's now going to run back to Sophia, and they're going to go off and have the best sex ever. And you know, in those situations, you know, I have experienced periods where sort of like, you know, I was cheated on, you know, when I was a young buck, and you know, when, you know, that ex-girlfriend never had better sex than with that person she cheated with me in my head. You know what I mean? It's that thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
for you, it's like it's the hurt of it all. So it's like, well, that this is what happened, and it's the worst thing, and so that's where that frustration, and I think that's where the despair comes from. So at that point, I was like, I get it, I totally get it. It's all in his head. But again, it comes back to this idea of so self-indulgent. It's all in his head. Like it's shown in black and white. It's clearly in his head, and he just runs through the streets to try and intervene on that, and then just doesn't find them.
I mean, I really like what you're saying, because I mean, I've also been in that situation, and I know the, like, you can feel your brain becoming mad, right?
Yeah.
You know, like you're like, oh, right, this is why people, go out and murder somebody and seem completely gonzo.
Crimes of passion, like you go, oh yeah, this is it. Like, I've got to step outside right now.
Yeah, you could, and like you're imagining everything in vivid detail and can't stop picturing this, and every image hurts and drives you crazy. Having said that, I think that he's right. I mean, I think that his friend did go back to her.
But the point,
not necessarily to have sex. I don't know that they're in a sexual relationship, but she invited him to the bar for a reason. They might not be together, but they're clearly still in touch. She wants that shield, and if nothing else, he is going to check on her.
Yes. But what actually happens is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because it's the torture that he puts himself through. That moment of him sprinting, and then he stops, and he's like, there's almost like a moment where he stops, and he's just that despair, and then he's like, no, I've got to keep running. And he just, that keeps driving him until he gets that moment of despair, and he collapses on the street. It's whatever happened between Pelayo and Sophia in the real world is irrelevant. We will never know. They might have got together, they may not have done, but in Cesar's head, that's what matters in that moment. That's what drives everything beyond that point.
Another way that I identify with him in that moment is just sort of being left alone, and especially if you drink. And, and you're depressed anyway, there's that, like, moment where the party's over, or a moment where, oh, okay, everybody's going home. Wow, now I have to sit with myself.
Yeah.
And that, the bricks come crashing down. I really identify with that, having been there far too often.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there is that thing of, like, I have got those scenarios in my head. I can think back of being like the center of the party, or the center of, you're on a night out, and you're doing it because you're compensating for something, or you've had a crappy week, or you're sort of feeling a bit down, or something like it's happened with whoever you're with, or whatever. So you're determined, I'm going to have the best night ever. And so you're out with friends, and you're just knocking them back, and you're dancing and doing whatever. And then the night ends, and all that frustration and all that rage and everything you've sort of tried to sort of suppress by having those sort of like those fun times, still there as you get into the taxi at the end of the night, or you're walking home, and you end up punching a street sign, or or whatever that whatever,
or a stranger,
or a stranger,
as one does.
Yeah, or you end up stealing a for sale sign and hurtling at people's houses. But
or you just go home and sit there and cry, and I mean, you're talking about, you and I are probably more likely to have experienced your scenario where it's like, hey, Julian's here, Scott's here, we're the life of the party, hey man, and then you feel like everyone loves you, and then you leave, and it's like, right, now I'm alone again. In this case, he's not the life of the party, though. He's a drag on the party. I mean, he is the guy, he's the bad friend who you have to watch, who you're like, man, did you really have to drink that much that quickly? I get that you're depressed. Like, there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to help you, except, like, I care about you, man. You're making her feel uncomfortable. Yeah. You kind of deserve to be hit right now, but I'm not going to hit you, but you're going to still think that I'm the enemy.
There's no way when you watch that club scene, there's nothing that can happen other than Sophia sort of like giving in that would, console him at that point. It's the fact that he even mimics the night they met to try and sort of rekindle that spark. And it seems, like you said, it looks and sounds pathetic. Like he's trying. He's had too much to drink at that point, and he's trying things, and it comes across in that way as desperation and sort of slightly overbearing. And I just find that it's tragic. You watching it, you're sat there watching it and going like, despite him not being, like you say, the particularly nice person, it's tragic to watch because you're just going like, this is not ending well. Like, final.
He is a car crash, right? I mean, you're watching a car crash of a life. Yeah. I mean, a guy who's already vomited in the bathroom, and you feel bad for her. You also you feel bad for him, but mostly it's also like you're just watching somebody disintegrate.
Yes. And it's like I say, it's car crash TV. Like you can't not watch it. You're just like, oh, this is really getting bad. Someone needs to intervene.
It's really well done. And even moving forward, getting into like those mysteries that kind of distract you from the what is reality aspect. Sort of who has he killed, right? And also sort of like he believes that the girl who crashed the car, Nuria, is still alive. He's not convinced. He even says like, I didn't see the body.
Yeah. I like the fact that mystery, again, it comes back to this idea of this film is going to give you everything. When he was alive, post the crash, he was never convinced. He was still confused about the events that led to the crash and about the events post it. Like he was in a coma for 3 weeks, and so there's a period of time where he's completely disengaged from things. And that's the other thing to remember as well for the other characters. Like they've had over a month by the point that he's re-engaging with society, like for them to move on. But yeah, he's not entirely sure what's happened with Nuria. And so when you have this transition, this sort of slip into the virtual reality, and she starts to sort of intervene, like he sort of thinks that she's reinserted herself into his life in the creepiest possible way. And again, that's done really, really well. And then they all start turning against him because it's not Nuria, it's Sophia, and so on and so forth. And that's a really cool, like, confusion scene. But before we get into all that, one of the things I wanted to sort of like to tack on to this thing is that we do have this sort of like second timeline that starts to run. And you see him in prison wearing his facial prosthetic and refusing to take it off. And he is talking with a psychiatrist. And what you learn is you never see his face, but the psychiatrist actually says to him, like, why are you wearing that still? Like, you say, no, I'm disfigured, I've got this or that. And they say, well, no, we fixed you, or it was fixed. You are fine under there. Again, completely telling you that when you finally see that the fix is done, like, that there is something wrong here. But I really like those conversations between those two. It becomes a good relationship. This psychiatrist sort of becomes he's not fleshed out any more than any other character in this thing other than Cesar, but there's little nuggets around him that I find really interesting. I don't know what your thoughts of that relationship.
I agree with you, and I like the idea. I mean, I believe in psychiatry and talk therapy, and I like the idea of I like the psychiatrist, and obviously he goes out on a limb. It's not totally believable, but it's his fantasy. And I like this sort of process that he's going through. And ultimately, he's talking to himself, right? I mean, this is really what we're doing anyway in talk therapy. But, he is talking to himself and he's going through that process to get better. And there's a lot of subtlety like that I like here. Even the idea that, you were talking about, before this about the bar scene, even the idea that like, and how it had been 3 weeks that he was in a coma. Even the idea that, hey, we do sort of meet people who we hit it off with, and we think, boy, like they're amazing. Could they be the one? And then, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have that staying power, or somebody moves, or whatever. I mean, life intervenes, and that's a wonderful sort of like puncturing of these sort of like romantic tropes that we have, right? And nothing is more damaging than these romantic tropes of like finding the one and every happily ever after, because as you say, like, no, he's a narcissist. This is not going to be a good relationship.
No, yeah, and that's the thing, is like I say, I like the fact that although he's talking to a psychiatrist, none of that, there is no sort of, what you were describing, it made me think of like a rom-com. Like there's a version of this where she sat by his bedside for 3 weeks, sort of like, in fact, there is a film with Sandra Bullock called While You Were Sleeping. So there you go. There is a version of this. But the point is, like I say, when he's having this conversation with the psychiatrist, like, they're focusing in on the murder. Like, you are in here because you allegedly killed someone, and we are now looking for a motivation or, some sort of justification. Like something's happened. Like, what made you snap? What happened to you? But during those conversations, it's very focused. But there's no sort of like, there's no sort of self-realization. There's no sort of moment of like, you're right, doctor, I am this person, or those sorts of things. It is very much just focusing on that, which I find interesting, because again, other films, and we'll see what happens when we get to the film, like there'd be moments of sort of like, the therapist would be like, trying to push for that self-actualization or whatever, and it's just not there. And again, it comes to that thing of like, well, he's not actually a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Because he's not real. So he's not actually, you say he's talking to himself. And so I like the fact that it sort of pins that down again to just focusing on that motivation.
Yeah. I mean, I quite like the psychiatrist, and I think that I want to get into sort of the confusion of the two women. It is hard not to read their depiction and the confusion of those two, of one woman for another, including the one that you supposedly love so much, let me push it as sort of arch misogynist.
Yes. Yeah.
When you get to the point that women are literally interchangeable in your mind, okay, it's some arch misogynist stuff. So having said, okay, I got more to say, but I mean, comment on that.
But he actually, you make a really good point, because there's actually this idea of them being interchangeable. He is confronted by Nuria in the car, and she's like, "You know nothing about me," and he's almost like, I don't want to know anything about you. And then later on, when the confusion happens, and you have the Sophia Nuria sort of interchange, when he goes to the police and he says, no, this is Nuria, and they're like, okay, what's her second name? And he's like, I don't know, she never told me. And it's more a case of, you, even as a viewer, well, you never asked. Like, and so you're completely right. There are moments when that comes back to bite his ass, but it's interesting that it's total misogyny. Like,
Well,
sorry,
and even no, I mean, that goes to your point about his character, and I mean, I think that we're supposed to think that, and there's even that narration at the beginning where he says, like most other young men, I and like to make love, and Nuria in the car says, what do you know about me? I'm, something like I'm young and attractive and a good lay. And he says, well, those are important things. It's like, what more do you want? Is there something else I should know about you? It is misogynistic, but confusing those two women, especially when you've made the center point of your entire afterlife fantasy one of those women, does seem to be some sexist thinking. Having said that, much like your criticism of him, and I'm not without the same criticism as a rich privilege, right? First world problems. I mean, I've just said it's arch misogyny. At the same time, these are sort of baked into the plot.
Mhm.
And I note them. I mean, I've noted them here, but I do find that there are elements of these things that I find interesting and poetic and fitting. There's something about his descent into madness. And, you know, much like you were talking about that moment on the street as he sees his friend leaving and how we can kind of like identify with it.
Mm.
You know how like people will say the wrong name, right? You know,
Yeah.
they'll, you know, your wife can call you by the dog's name sometimes, right? You know, I mean, it happens. It happens in my house too. You know, where it's like, okay, there is this way in which, like, even people who, and watching this film, I feel this, even people who we love, who are important to us, there's a part of our brain that has, our brains are associative, and there's a part of our brain that has like all of those memories, all of that emotion, all of this association, the imagery of what they look like, our history with them, but ultimately there's a signifier, whether it's a name, you know, seeing them, scent, all of these things might trigger, oh yes, that box of associations.
Mm.
And then there's this sort of madness of like, what if those triggers, those signifiers get scrambled? And, you know, I don't know who you are, which is, you know, I mean, if you have seen your parents deteriorate, I mean, or known aunts and uncles, I mean, this is a very real thing. And it's also, I mean, that was not my only head injury.
Mm-hmm.
And it shakes your short-term memory up, and you find, you know, I mean, I've wept not knowing what just happened and being able to remember, but certainly there's a sort of madness of like, oh my God, you know, sometimes like you get drunk or stoned or something, and you're like, oh yeah, I've completely confused those two memories.
Yeah.
And it's scary how easily those things can slide together. Now, okay, it's misogynistic, but there is this element that.
Well, I think there's more. I think there's two things that come. There's actually a thing. Don't forget. One of the things that they've now characterized, or they've now confirmed, I think, is every time you remember a memory, you are not remembering the memory. You are remembering the last time you remembered that memory.
Yeah.
So every time it comes, it's slightly different. It's a variant. And this thing you said about sort of like interchangeable and this thing, like, yeah, I've seen it like firsthand. Like you say, like, oh, not so much, you know, you talk about it with people the older, Alzheimer's and that sort of thing. But when I guess I've suffered several head injuries and concussions. You know, I've played stupid sports like rugby, American football, and wrestling. But I vividly remember when in
everybody
wrestling,
listening is like, I understand this podcast so much better now after this episode. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's not. This is when 20th Century Geek. Like, oh yeah, he cannot stay on topic. I remember that my tag team partner at the time, Scotty Grimm, got hit in the head like really badly, like, you know, severe concussion. Not severe, like, you know, it wasn't brain trauma, but it was like to that point, like it was just directing a meat sack to try and do things, and every few seconds, like his memory was just, I was like, right, Scotty, get in the car, and he would walk a couple of paces and then just sort of like stop, and you're like, right, I'll get you to the car because we've got to get you to hospital. And in the car, and he was sort of like every few seconds he'd be like, where are we going? Where's so and so? And like, you know, who's this? And you're just like, right, yeah, this is scary. Like, I was really worried that, like, okay, something more than a concussion has happened here. He was fine, you know, if everyone cares, he was fine and went on and recovered, not a problem. But in that moment, like, it's scary how sort of things in his head must have been an absolute jumble. But I've had it as well, you know, where I've either when you drink too much, and you know, I've drank too much, I've come home and I cannot remember getting home or getting to bed, and then you wake up in the middle of the night and your head's just like, the room's spinning, I can't remember things, my body doesn't quite seem to coordinate in the same way. Like the human brain isn't the sort of isn't always the best functioning machine. It's a very complex machine. So yeah, I can completely understand this thing of like if this is his head putting it together. The other thing I would say is at his moment of death, or the thing that led to his death, that moment of splice, whatever you want to do it, the moments that led up to it, the two most important women in his life, because his parents are dead and there's no one else, is Sophia, because that's his love idol. This is the person he loves. He's fixated on, and Nerea, because she is the woman who has got him to this place, like this incident, and he clearly doesn't see her side of it. He's just like, no, she drove off a road and sent me to this place. Those two women, I agree with the misogyny, but in his head they are sort of so interlinked. They're so interwoven with events that, and as you said, like even before the switch, like he has an element of paranoia that Nerea's still in the shadows. Like he's not convinced she's gone, and so this sort of feels like when this night happens and he sees Nerea, like it feels to me like when you realize what it all is, like his brain has rebelled. Like it's his guilt, it's his paranoia, it's all these elements coming back, because he's always, again, elements of narcissism. He keeps referring to them when he says up to the psychiatrist and to others. It's sort of like it's they and them, isn't it? Sort of like they made this happen. It's them. It's this sort of like nebulous people that don't believe him, and so he constantly believes there's an external force involved in this. It's not just Nerea. It's like it's Nerea and them, and he's not sure what that is. And so it definitely portrays his misogyny. But I also feel like it's all that is like his negative emotion, like his guilt and his paranoia. He's just bubbled up at that moment of contentment. Like that moment when it happens is a complete moment of contentment. Like he's with Sophia. They've started a relationship. They've just sort of slept together. They're comfortable in bed. They are sleeping, and it's this moment of almost perfect contentment. Like that's his fantasy reaching its peak almost. And I'm going to make a Red Dwarf reference in it, but it's like his brain rebels and says, "Oh no. Confidence and paranoia. This is the paranoia coming forward and being like, oh, you're happy, are you? I'm about to mess this up."
Sorry, you're a git.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. And he because it starts with him going into the bathroom and seeing his disfigurement. You get the jump scare, but that wakes him out of his actual. Like you see him in bed then with the sleep. He gets up to double check, and that's when he comes back and finds Nerea. To me, that is his guilt and everything coming back to bite him. So.
No, I like that idea, and I thought of that too. Sort of watching this, that it's like his subconscious won't let him be really happy, won't let him fully live out this fantasy. And you're right that these two women are linked. They're linked in that night in question, right before the splice. But that's not independent from the misogyny, right? I mean, but it's not reducible to misogyny either. So, yeah, I mean, I was going to say that, well, when I was in my later 20s, actually closer to 30. Oh God, I was one of the many times I played Fight Club. Was on a concrete surface, and so my head got smashed up. And what I experienced was, I mean, I had a slight wound, but the main thing was that all of my memories of the day were mixed up, and it was as if you took like, little note cards with locations, and you took like poker chips with people. And you just mixed up every given scene with and put all of those same scenes in a random order. And the people who were in those scenes were also randomly distributed. So I would remember different people saying the same things in a different setting. And as people were correcting me, I realized this timeline did not make sense, and began to cry just sort of the massive destabilization of personality that you feel, as you really know your memory is screwed up. So, but that to me gets at this idea of sort of those are all, whether they're note cards or chips or whatever, like they're just these arbitrary signifiers. It's like, there's this great line in the film about the psychiatrist is talking about the women changing. And he says, people in dreams, they begin a sentence and then it's your dad. And you so rarely hear that talked about, right? I mean, you see these dream sequences and it's like, it's exactly like a movie and very consistent and there's continuity. But it's, it's not clear. Is he going mad? Is he, or is this some sort of dream? Of course, it is a dream. And as you point out, maybe that's because he is unable to really be happy.
Yeah, it comes this idea of this idea of dreams interesting. You're right. That line you mentioned is a really good one, because he says that you could start with talking to your teacher in your classroom, and you end up then talking to your mom in a different environment, and then it's somebody else. But to you, it's a linear conversation, and that's true. That's so sort of a really succinct way of describing it. But yeah, it's that moment when this happens. It's like obviously in the film when you did that sort of the jump scare with the disfigurement's fine. But the whole Nerea thing is the moment, and that's the Matrix moment, or the existence moment, or whatever you want to call it. It's that idea of like, this is a separate reality. Now, dream, it's not, you're sort of told it's a dream. Like you said, there's signifiers throughout the film, but there's something wrong with reality. I was watching and thinking he's suffering from a delusion. Like, she is Sophia, and he's just seeing somebody else's face. And the guy actually says to him, doesn't he? The psychiatrist, or I think it's actually names it and says, "You might be suffering from." Oh, he describes it as like anorexia. He says, "Oh, it's a complete misconception of anorexia." So I'm not saying this is what it is, but like in the film, he says it's like anorexia. It's sort of like women or people that say they see themselves as much larger than they are, and they continue to, but it's a delusion. They don't see anything. Are you seeing? Yes, obviously talking about it's real. It's his face, but he's trying to portray it for this Nerea Sophia. And so for me, when I first started watching, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, I still think that's Penelope Cruz Sophia on the bed, but he's seeing Nerea. And it's not until then you sort of go, actually, no, this is all in his head, that it all sort of starts to make sense.
Yeah, and I like that it you're right. I mean, it preserves that possibility. And I like that it preserves these, not just mystery, but also interpretive possibilities, because there is resonance to these different possibilities, and we can feel them and argue about them. That thing you're talking about is dysmorphia. And
yes,
I have that. I mean, it's not as badly as most women who suffer from it. But I mean, I will, be sitting down and just think, my God, my thighs are enormous. I'm disgusting. And it's like other people, I'm built like I'm a scarecrow, right? But in my mind, I being an adolescent, I thought I was just the ugliest guy in the world. But it doesn't cause you to literally hallucinate and see, like I'm either super handsome or I have terrible scars. But again, it's the sort of psychological resonance of this film and that sort of descent into madness.
Yes, it's all part of that. Though. You think, like, is he mad? Because again, the future version, the second sort of like timeline, or this second sort of part that's running, you'd never see his face until the very end. Like, he doesn't remove that mask, so you are never sure what his face actually looks like. And so, because when he does confront,
you're talking about the psychiatry scene.
Yes, when he's in the future,
right?
Yeah, when he's in the future,
interspersed with that, you do have him like recovering and. Yes. Penelope Cruz is touching his face that's healed. And...
Yeah, no, I mean, when he's in the prison. So when he's in the prison and post the murder, like, he never removes his mask because he believes he is still disfigured. And it sort of comes to play that what because obviously with this whole thing with Maria Sophia happens, he gets called in the police, and the police are like, no, all her papers are in order. Like that is Sophia, like da, da, da. And he leaves, and he thinks he's crazy, and he goes to confront her, and that's when the murder happens, because then he sees it as Sophia's Penelope Cruz again, and then they sleep together, and halfway through, he sees her as Maria, and he pulls a pillow over her face and suffocates her. And that's when you're sort of like, okay, this is crazy. But then when he leaves, he dashes down the stairs, and there's a mirror in the landing on the hallway, and he sees his face, and it's disfigured again. And it feels again like this whole thing of like anything that's negative, anything that he feels is sort of negative, that side of things, results in this disfigurement. Like this disfigurement is almost like I thought of like the picture of Dorian Gray, or weirdly like Two-Face. It made me. It's crystallizing in my head a bit, but it did flicker across my brain before. The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller comic. If we're going to keep it nerdy, in that Two-Face is fixed. There's a whole story in the first issue where Two-Face is fixed. But he still sees himself as having been fixed. Everyone sees him as Harvey Dent, but he sees himself as fully the bad side, or the disfigured side of Two-Face. And it's the same sort of sentiment, this idea of like the negativity taking over and being represented by this disfigurement. And so when he's happy and content and he can live his life, the fix has happened. The moment it goes pear-shaped, the disfigurement sort of like sets back in again. And the mask returns.
Pear-shaped is a nice euphemism for murdering a girl you're having sex with.
Yeah, and I will say, all right, and this could just be the way it's shot, but continues to have sex with whilst he's killing her.
Yeah. Again, not without misogynistic implications, yet also resonant. I think that and what you're talking about is, the Beauty and the Beast thing. I mean, there's a Jean Cocteau version of this film that is really awesome. But I think that, yes, it's a problematic film. But, what's interesting is all of these things are so resonant. These mysteries are resonant. The disfigurement as an expression of, now, of course, here again, we talked about anti-ableism with Gattaca. There is an anti-ableist argument. I certainly know people who would say any implication that physical disfigurement is an expression of inner monstrosity is horrifying and should be banished from art, or at least we should talk about it and point that out. So I'm noting that for the record. That's fair to say. But I do think that, I mean, even the idea that there is also in the back of all of this that part of his paranoia is the idea that other people are trying to take over his company, or take over this wealth. And we don't really know anything about this wealth or what his parents did, but it's there in the background, and we've seen that plot in so many movies, right? That it's very plausible to us that maybe they're drugging him, and that's why he's seeing another woman's face.
And that would have been an excellent addition to the plot. Like if that was them, the partners in the restaurant chain were trying to get him out. Like he was a liability. Yeah, no, you've seen it in a number of different things. There's so many different, versions or different sort of like reasons for what's going on. But let's talk about what actually is going on. So we talked about, so he has been cryogenically frozen, and let's talk about the end. So in the end, like he gets taken, he is in prison. You've seen this, this conversation between him and the psychiatrist, and eventually he figures out that he keeps saying that this Ellie, and they are describing it as ELI, is what they think he said. They think it's a person, and eventually he sees this life extension advert on the television. So his brain, obviously it must be a fancy, pops this in, and he sees it, and it sees LE, and it's not LE, it is LE. They I was going to say Google it. It's not Google because it's 1997. They search for
Also,
it and
it's a movie, right? So I mean, it
Yeah.
should have been like
Yeah.
Alta Vista, but you know,
Yes.
they don't want to traipse on trademark and copyright.
But one of the things I like is I forget what it's called, but the image that is used for the search engine is a set of eyes. And obviously, the film's called it starts with Open Your Eyes and obviously ends with Open Your Eyes. So this idea of the information being available to you as you open your eyes is I liked. But he finds this life extension. They go visit life extension, and it all comes back to them, and he all recalls it. And it's this whole thing about him being cryogenically frozen. And the guy gives a bit of a sort of exposition about how it works. And I actually like the explanation. It's very good about the splicing and everything. And then you basically get like a virtual reality version of the French guy that runs Life Extension explaining it and giving him this way out. What are your thoughts on that ending and that finale? That sort of like not so much the explanation, but how it's confronted and then this sort of final choice that he's given.
Well, I have multiple thoughts on it. I think that when they go to Life Extension, it is suitably creepy. I mean, here he says, I feel like I've been here before, right? Well, he has, right? That is memories of having been there. I think that revelation of, you know, granted, this is 97, so, you know, when these dreams are sort of digitized, you have this kind of a Photoshop-like effect that kind of obscures them. It comes off as a little crude today.
Yeah.
But when you finally do see it and it's like, my God, I've been here, I signed up, it comes off as a suitably revelatory moment. The psychiatrist not believing, you know, is quite good. And then the people disappearing, I think, is also just creepy. That rooftop, it's a great setting. The one thing that bothers me, I mean, a couple of things bother me, at least watching it now. And I don't think they bothered me at the time. One is I'm not entirely convinced of this. I think it's done well, but of this like VR option. Hasn't really been mentioned before. I mean, like Life Extension by itself is the sci-fi concept that's woven through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And here you're suddenly told, well, we also have this other option. And now I think, yeah, you know, those are two separate sci-fi concepts. Freezing people is pretty believable. Keeping them in a VR environment with the entire world digitized, including this building, you know, raises other problems. And then my second objection is the way out is to jump off the building.
Yeah. That I always have a problem with. Because it's this idea of like you've got to make a choice. You know, life or death, but death can be a gateway to the next thing, or death is a gateway to true reality. It always bothers me, that does. You know, this idea of you could stay here and you know be with, because it was when they're on the ceiling, he then has the Sophia and Paleo appear on the rooftop, you know, this is the character. He says, "Oh, you could stay here and you could live this, you know, this life, make this choice, or you jump and you wake up in the real world." And it just feels cultish, or I don't know. Like, I don't know if you ever saw like Life on Mars. The British version has a similar thing where he's actually in reality, but to go back to this other reality, like it all feels very. I don't know. There's something about it I feel very uncomfortable with. And I don't know if it's I don't know, is it sort of like a religious thing? This idea of sort of like you know, the afterlife of this alternative beyond death.
Well, there's no reason he has to kill himself, right? I mean,
Someone could just press a button and bring him around, I'm sure.
So it's like, look, here is the safe word, right? Say the safe word and we'll pull you out and into the, you know, we might have the guy materialize and double check that you mean it. But, you know, and you say the double safe word or whatever. But I mean, you know, there's no need to have him enact a suicide. Now, I think that, I find myself uncomfortable with that. I think that it might work if you had more ambiguity about whether or not he really is in a VR scenario. And I don't think there is any ambiguity.
No,
I think it's right. So my problem is, I was not troubled by that when this first came out. Now I'm a middle-aged man and someone who struggled with suicidal thoughts, and I object to. We've seen this a million times. You've got to jump off the building, to escape into the real world or something. It's become kind of a cliche. I don't think that's fair to put on this film, but having said that, I think it's dangerous to suggest that suicide is a positive thing and leads to, the real world or to a better life or something like that. It's that it's the answer.
Yes.
Anytime that, people struggle with the thought that it's the answer, and you need to fight those thoughts and say, no, that's not reality. I'm not going to listen to you. So to have fiction that is, and I think intoxicating and, certainly solipsistic, but I'm sympathetic to simulation theory. It does bother me that suicide is the answer here, and it doesn't need to be. It is the most dramatic, but it doesn't need to be.
It feels like it was made as a choice to be, I don't want to say edgy, but like, I can imagine that when this was written and when they were making it, they were like, yeah, that's the gut punch end. That's what we want. That's the full stop on this. And I think that's what they're going for. It just, it doesn't quite work for me. The one thing I do like about this thing, though, is the psychiatrist. Because it opens up this fascinating idea. So this psychiatrist has been followed. He refuses to believe it. So as they've been going into life extension, at one point, Cesar does say, it's all a dream. All of this is a dream. I'm in my dream. And the psychiatrist is saying, well, no, because I'm real. I'm me. Like, you are not dreaming me. I am real. And then when it is revealed to be a virtual reality, like, the psychiatrist is like, no, this is crazy. This is insane. And then it's sort of like they make the people disappear, and he can't find anyone. And it dawns on him, and you see this guy sort of like crumple, and he's like, "Where's my daughter? Where's my wife? Where are my daughters?" And then but then like, when he's sort of like weeping for this loss and for this realization, this other virtual reality guy from Life Attention is like, yeah, he's not real. Like, he's not really he's not really crying. Like, he's not real. And they sort of show him, and as Cesar is making that decision, and I'm just like, wow, like I you're now telling me he's virtual reality, but I'm still like feeling this guy's like absolute wreck.
I think that has stuck with me. I think that's quite well done. And of course, now it's 20 some years later. This would be like, we've seen this exact same scene on like Rick and Morty, but it's played for laughs. It's like, I gave up my career, for I abandoned my family, and you're telling me my whole universe is, a simulation. And it's played as a joke, right? Here it's played deadly seriously. What's interesting to me about that, of course, I think it's effective. I sympathize with him too. It's good acting. And again, evocative. It gets to this evocative nature of this film. But what's interesting to me is, if as a middle-aged man, God, I hate saying that, I look at this and say, like, okay, so I've said that I'm sympathetic to simulation theory. That does not mean we shouldn't be kind to each other. One of the essential problems of existence is that I don't know that you have the same consciousness that I do, nor do you, assuming, that you do, for me. And yet, we seem to find ourselves here. I believe I want to, my dog just died. If the dog is a simulation, my God, I still want to take care of her. I
Yeah.
love her. You know, whether that's for my own narcissism or that's because she, has an experience. At the end of the day, does not matter. In the same
No.
way, for me, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're only being good because you think you're going to go to heaven, you should be good because you love people. And so
This
you look
is this. I completely listen. Sorry to interrupt. No, go finish before
Yeah.
you.
Well, I mean, now we have you have a child. I read
Mhm.
these things about kids, like basically saying, Siri is a pet, right? Like,
Mhm.
being attached to these virtual things. And I absolutely feel my Alexa is an object. And if I insult Alexa, I don't care about its feelings. And I do have a little tinge of like, wow, I'm being cruel to Alexa. But it's an NPC. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And I'll be in video games and slaughter people left and right. Other people will be like, no, I mean, even though I'm in that video game, I want to play morally. That guy needs my help. Sometimes I play like that, sometimes not. But kids increasingly have relationships with NPCs and with
Yeah.
Alexa and whatnot.
Two things.
Yeah.
Firstly, a confession. I agree. I do not see Alexa as sentient. We have Alexa. However, I cannot I could not sort of ask it something and then not say thank you at the end. I repeatedly say thank you, Alexa, at the end of things. She doesn't give a shit. She's not real. But maybe it's my innate Britishness. Thank you very much for that answer. Like, it's nonsense. But I can't stop myself. I recently found out that Alexa responds to at least two Red Dwarf responses. Do you want toast? And do you believe in Silicon Heaven? And I did that several times, and every time I was like, "Thank you very much." Like, you've made me chuckle. Like, no, she hasn't. Someone's programmed that. It's all make believe. However, having said that, you said this thing about virtual reality and this idea of simulation theory. But you and I have talked about this on several occasions. But one of the things there was a documentary I watched this year actually called "Glitch in the Matrix."
Mm-hmm.
And it also comes back to a religious sort of question as well. This idea of morality, and so that it's in the documentary "Glitch in the Matrix," it posits this idea: if we are in a simulation, then morality is a complete waste of time because none of it's real. It doesn't support it. It's just saying that's a theory. Like if we are a simulator, we're a bunch of pixels, and we don't know how many simulations down we are. Right, because there's this idea there's a reality, and then that reality has reached the point where it can create a simulation. Well, that simulation might reach a point where it can create a simulation, so on and so forth. So there's this idea of it's turtles all the way down, but it's simulations. So this idea, and so there are people that have had these sort of moments of crystallization where they fully 100% believe they are in a simulation and have acted on it in such a manner. I think there was a guy who in the documentary who killed both his parents. Like he'd watched The Matrix and he'd read up on this idea of simulation theory and all this stuff, and he just had this moment of crystallization and went in and shot both his parents and was like, yeah, they don't matter, they're not real, like I'm not real. And it's sort of, I think he realizes now, probably in retrospect, that it was a bad idea, but it's there. But it also comes to me, this idea of morality, and this is a complete side point, because I also have this idea that people sort of say things like, and people have said this to me, as I'm an atheist, have said to me, well, how do you know what right and wrong is if you don't have a religious compass? And I'm like, because I'm human. I don't need a deity or some religious teaching to tell me what's right or wrong. Like, I was raised with a moral code,
and humans throughout history, before Christianity, long before Christianity, animals have a moral code.
Exactly.
There is an extent to which, I mean, if you're mean, other dogs will be like, I don't like that. That's. I mean, they do these experiments with like the hedgehog and the different puppets, and you make one of them behave cruelly and the other one nice. And the dog will warn its master, like, that hedgehog is bad news.
Yeah.
I'm mad at it. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is something that has been proven is in our brains.
Yeah, so there's this innate morality. And so I do agree that moment, and maybe that's why I know at this point that the psychiatrist is not, is an NPC for all intents and purposes, but I still have that element of sympathy or empathy for him at that moment. And the fact that I don't think Cesar does, I'm not sure if he does or not, because he sort of he looks at him and he still obviously makes a choice. And I'm not saying he shouldn't make that choice, but there's no acknowledgement of looking back, because he says goodbye to his friend and he says goodbye to Sophia, but that's clearly more of a, like, it's not like it feels less like a sentimental goodbye, and it feels like something else. And then he completely ignores this doctor, the psychiatrist.
And it's a little weird, right? I mean,
it doesn't feel right.
Well, I think he's letting go. Like it's a letting go of Sophia, right? And his friend. But to get to this point of morality, the reason why we're good, it's not really a good act if you're doing it. I mean, if you do something because you're told I'm going to get $100 if I do it, and it's quote unquote a good act, but you're doing it for the $100, you're not doing it because it's a good act. You're doing it for that $100. Any morality is stripped out of that equation. In the same way, if you're doing it to get into heaven, any morality is stripped out of that equation. Ultimately, because we did evolve with a sense of morality, the reason to be good is because you don't feel guilty and you enjoy feeling, helping people. And if I'm playing a game and I feel perfectly entitled to, gun people down in Grand Theft Auto, but there will also be a character who because of the way he's presented and the way the story's told, I think, no, I identify with that character. I feel bad for him, and I'll give him money, or I'll, do things that objectively hurt me or cost me something in a game. And yet I want to do that. And, I want my dog to not suffer. We want our children to have good lives. We want our loved ones to do well. I think the most amazing thing about all of these, it's terrible that people have gone off and killed people based on this. And I, but to me, that is a fundamental misunderstanding. The most amazing thing about whether or not we're in a simulation or whether or not heaven's real or God's real or any of it is none of it makes any damn difference.
Yeah.
You should still be a good person, not because of any reward, but because it is, I do believe it's ennobling to us and it gives us joy. And it's a path to contentment and letting go of guilt and, feeling at peace with ourselves and each other. And if it all turns out to be nonsense, then it was all nonsense anyway. But at least that person didn't suffer. And if they are alive, then great. And if they weren't, then I felt good at helping them.
Well, I completely agree. And I think one of those things is like, if someone was to say to me, I actually had this conversation with Alex. I said to Alex, if I was to tell you that this reality wasn't real, if we were a simulation, we're a bunch of pixels in a vast server, somewhere, what would you think? And she was like, do I still have to get up tomorrow morning and take Ellie to school? And I was like, well, yeah, because that's the reality we're in. And she was like, then it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, by the way, I was waiting to see if you'd say it.
Yeah.
You're saying Ellie, not L.E.
No, yes. Ellie. Eleanor, her name is, yes. But, is this
That's
this
not
idea.
Part of the greater simulation.
No. It's not some vast sort of conspiracy with this film. Like this idea of like, all right, if we are a bunch of pixels or we are a bunch of data and a thing, I'm still sat here at a desk. You and I are conversing over Skype. We have still watched a film that was created from our from our time perspective, 1997. Like, it's still a reality. there is consequences for that. We've created structures and a social contract in order for us to survive. So whether I am in the vast cosmic universe real or not is irrelevant at this point, because I'm still me and we are still living in this universe. And so to be good, or to have the moral choice, and that's not to say I always make the best choice. I'll try and make the right choice, but I will admit there are still times I walk past, people, homeless people, and I don't give money, or I do things where I can't or whatever. But you generally try and make the best choices to make the world, if not a better place, not a shitty place.
Yeah. Well, and also these things matter to us. And being a good person matters to us. Now, that's certainly culturally defined to some degree, but to a surprising degree, it's not. Simple concepts of fairness and kindness and compassion really are universal to a great degree. And we feel better. Our brains give us, endorphins, and long term, we feel better about ourselves. I like being able to sleep at night. Sometimes, and it occurs to me, what the hell are we doing? We're doing a podcast about, as you said, this movie made years ago. The sun is someday, we believe, at least in this reality, going to explode. And before it does so, it will expand out and consume Earth. And I hope to God, for lack of a better phrase, that humanity gets its act together and gets off planet by then. But that's narcissistic on my part. I won't be around to enjoy it one way or another. And, at the end of the day, certainly by that point, nobody's going to care about this podcast that we're doing.
Yeah.
So what does anything matter? I mean, it matters because we enjoy it. I love you and I love talking to you and I love talking about these movies, and these movies, I care about them. They move me. They make me think about these things. And this is enjoyable. It feels meaningful to me. It doesn't have to be meaningful to the cosmos. It being meaningful to me is enough. And so to connect this back to the scene on the roof, it is weird that he doesn't show compassion for this psychiatrist who he spent a lot of time with, worked out everything with. He's still ultimately a narcissist at the end. I don't know that, because he's not really become a better person.
No, he hasn't, and that's the problem with that's the film in general. Like say, he doesn't learn anything from this, and it's interesting. Again, we'll get some thoughts in a minute, but he doesn't seem to have like an arc, and that surprised me with this film. Like you say, there's a realization that he's not in a the reality that he is in is a construct. Fine, but in his brain and emotionally, he is still he, and so he has made a connection with. He's spent time with that psychiatrist and that version of Sophia and that version of Paleo. And so I'm a bit like, I'm like, hang on, no. Like, even like human nature would have you say, like, at least even like a drop line, it would be like, I'm sorry. Yeah. I can't, I'm looking at you both and I can't stay here. Like, I've got to move on. At least when I wake up, you won't feel this pain anymore because you won't exist. Like, I don't know. There's just something like there's got to be something. The lack of acknowledgement really bothers me at the end of this film.
Well, you know how I always reference like Spielberg as like the master of those human moments.
I'm
thinking of a grossly underrated film, AI, where you have that child robot. Spoilers. Yeah. At the end, the aliens sort of find him and they explain everyone you've ever known is long dead. And even that line, there is this would ground this in some kind of emotion and also help dissipate that entitlement problem, because there is, of course, we don't get to see what reality is 150 years from now, which I'm fine with. I'm good with that. I don't need, transmet revivals or something. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I love that it ends with open your eyes again. But there is the problem that we've watched this, rich white guy entitlement, with a decent amount of problematic material about women and about suicide and ableism and, lots of things. Evocative, good, whatever. But still, at the end, he's going to be alive. He gets to go on. The woman who he made feel uncomfortable at the bar, she's been dead for 100 years or so.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, the ending in this is both sort of like oddly satisfying and dissatisfying at the same time, or unsatisfying. It's odd. But I do think it, as a whole, it's one of these things, and we'll get to final thoughts in a second, but it sort of seems to work. That was one of my questions. You've answered my question I was going to ask is, are you glad you don't get to see the future? I am. I like it because it draws a line under it sort of thing. And, I'm sure, as we've said, like we said with sort of like Strange Days and stuff, there's this thing of like, what happens after? Like, there's a whole acclimatization piece where like he wakes up and it's like 150 years later, and they're like, look, flying cars and whatever else. It could wake up in San Angeles and it's like, yeah, we've eradicated sex altogether. I don't know what it is, but there's that could be, and there's probably a person that's made that. Well, that's Futurama, to be fair. So, but I'm glad they draw that line under it. I'm glad we don't get to see anything else, and I'm pretty sure the people monitoring the budget were probably saying the same. But yes, that's it. We've gone through it. I think I'd rather let's try and get some final thoughts, unless there's any other points you'd like to raise or address.
No, I mean, all I would say is that this is an excellent movie. It's masterfully directed. It's very well written. We said beforehand, Penelope Cruz stands out, and not just because she's beautiful. She has so much expression in her eyes.
Yes,
there are so many shots where she does more with her eyes than the other actors are doing with their words, which is always, to me, the sign of a really good actor. So she stands out. This was kind of a breakthrough that led to her surviving, being cast in Vanilla Sky, the only actor who carries over. I would just say it's a very well-made film. It's got a lot to recommend it, but it, has not dated as well as it could have. And I am more troubled by this content than I was when I was maybe closer to being an angry, narcissistic, young, white, privileged guy.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can imagine this being what I'd refer to as like a university film. It's one of those sort of films you come across when you're in your early 20s as a student, or even if not a student, but like you come across this in that period, 18 to 25, and it will be a formative film. You will watch it, and it's one of those films that you could smoke some weed and you could sort of like go, oh man, yeah, much like we do. You could talk about the idea of reality and love and loss and all those things. And it hasn't dated well, because you do come back to this film as we are, sort of like middle-aged men, and you go, well, I've lived a bit of life now. I have some life experience. And watching this film, I can see that the characters carry a level of immaturity, that they're making some bad decisions, and you sort of want to stop them and go, I just want to talk to you. just to give you a bit of advice, mate. That's sort of like from a person that's seen some shit, let's have a conversation. And so, however, though, what I would say is first, it's beautifully made. Like, this film is a very, very well made film, structured incredibly well. As I said, sort of like, apart from that sort of, like you said, the virtual reality thing, which I don't think is mentioned, everything else is there. Like, it lays out all the clues, it gives you lots of sort of hints and stuff, and all the information is there, and it's incredibly well done. And I really enjoy that element, that I was able to watch it to the end, and I could watch this back again and go, oh yeah, there's that and that, and pick out the bits and pieces. And I love doing stuff like that. It's a wonderful story in that way, a wonderful mystery. The only thing is, like I say, is some of the content and some of the attitudes that don't play well in 2021. But again, I do think some of it can be tempered by saying that's who this character is. He is narcissistic. But I also can sort of empathise with his pain at losing his face, in that sort of like it is. It's alien to him. He is no longer able to identify as himself, and all this other stuff, and the lost love, and this idea of the frustration. All of it feels very relatable. So it's troublesome, but it definitely is relatable. Like, I can understand this film on many levels, and so I really enjoyed it. I think it was a very solid film. It's not one I think you'd revisit on the rotation. I mean, it's not popcorn film, but it makes you think, and it makes us. It's brought up a lot of conversation for us, which is one of the things I love about these films. You mentioned about Penelope Cruz, like, she is, like I say, she's beautiful, but like, her screen presence in this film, like, she is just confident, and she has a charisma that some of the others are lacking. Weirdly, even the guy that's meant to be sort of Cesar he's very attractive. He's a good-looking bloke, but he, even, and we'll see how Tom Cruise manages this in the next episode. But that transition from handsome to disfigured to handsome again, like, there should be a weight with that. There should be sort of like a charisma, sort of like a screen presence that comes with that he's slightly lacking. That's not to say he's a bad actor. He just doesn't quite convey in the same way. Yeah, but she being this held up as this sort of lost love and stuff, I completely understand. Like, she comes with this sort of energy and screen presence that's just, it's no wonder she was picked up. Like, she's just holds the screen. But yeah, I'll be interested, we'll be interested to sort of revisit this as a comparison for the next episode. It's gonna be very interesting. But yes, so any final moments or any sort of
No, I'm looking forward to seeing how the Hollywood adaptation holds up in the very next episode. Which is the penultimate episode of this season.
It is, yes. I think we'll wait for the, because we've already started to discuss things for future seasons and how inter-season or between seasons, sort of what we're going to be doing. Information on that will be available soon. We were talking about that probably in the next couple of episodes. But yes, in the next episode, though, we jump from 1997 to 2000, 3 years later, and the Hollywood version made by Cameron Crowe, Vanilla Sky. And so, we have a checkered history with Tom Cruise on this podcast. So let's see if it's always early 2000s as well, because obviously it's just, this is around the same time as Minority Report. So let's see how he holds up. But ladies and gentlemen and listeners, if you want to come and talk to us about Open Your Eyes, come find us firstly on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. Come and let us know what you think about this film. Does it hold up? Did you watch it when you were a young man? Are we right on some of our thoughts on it? But
are you sick of hearing two middle-aged white guys talk about these issues that they know nothing about?
Yes.
If you do, at PodTimeSpace.
Yes, yeah.
I'm joking. Please don't be mean. But the truth is, as I think we've shown, we're open to those discussions and we acknowledge them as issues.
Yeah, come and talk to us about it. I'm always fascinated by other people's interpretations or reflections or opinions on these films, because I think they're so important. So yeah, do come give us a different opinion. Be fascinated to find out. But yeah, come check us at PodTimeSpace. And if you really, really like what we're doing, of course, you're listening to us through a wonderful podcast catcher. Go onto it, leave a review, preferably 5 stars. But if you leave less, any and all feedback is appreciated. And finally, of course, we have the Patreon, www.patreon.com/20CG Media. That's 20CG Media. Julian and I do a weekly podcast, and they're trekking through the Twilight Zone. We're still getting through the first season, but there'll be every season of the Twilight Zone on there. I have a 30-minute thoughts podcast every month, and every quarter we do Creative Corner, and there's all kinds of bits and pieces going on. There's behind the scenes, you get to see all kinds of bits and pieces. We have got something bubbling away in the background at the moment. There may be a new member to the sort of the Stories Out of Time and Space crew. We'll see. With the hints of that have been sort of dropped already. But anyway, Julian, thank you very much for talking and for sort of like bringing me sort of Open Your Eyes. I really enjoyed this.
Well, it's my job to open your eyes, my simulation partner.
Yes, yeah. You've opened my eyes to this and Solaris, and so there's been some goodies. I'm very much looking for, because the next one's got Vanilla Sky and then The Fountain. I'm very much looking forward to talking about The Fountain. So
well, and you introduced me to The Man Who Fell to Earth, which has been the standout for me this season.
Yeah, no, that's been a fascinating conversation, and it's one I do often think about as well. So, but anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and we shall talk to you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.